Good evening. It's great to be back with you. It's hard for me I've got so many screens going on here. It's hard for me to focus on the camera in front of me. Um, January, what is today? The 25th already? January is almost over. So it's good to have you here tonight. The podcast has been doing well. I wanted to just say before we start that I did receive a request um, asking about whether the Sunday Life was on podcast. And I am doing a video podcast on YouTube, but that's a video podcast. And there's also the live stream that goes up on Facebook. So now I am downloading just the audio from these live streams and putting them into a podcast. And today I was working on getting that put up, and I can let you know. And I did send out an email earlier to everyone that subscribed that now you can go to iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Podcast, and Stitcher. You can go to those podcatchers and you can find Sunday Life there, and you can listen to those podcasts when you're working out or running or walking or whatever you're doing. So that is now available for Sunday Life. I'm still working on iTunes. It's a little more difficult, and iTunes makes everything harder. So tonight we are going to be talking about the parables of Jesus. And I'm going to share my screen here. Just 1 second. We'll see. Last week we had a little problem with that, but I think we've got all those bugs worked out. So the parables of Jesus, why does knowing about the parables mean so much, and how does that help you in your organic spiritual life with Christ? Spiritual gold, these are what you're going to take away from this live stream tonight, is that the benefits of understanding the parables of Jesus. That's what we're going to talk about. The key to understanding the parables of Jesus, and how the parables help you to grow stronger spiritually. To introduce this section, this stream on understanding the parables of Jesus, there's a quote that I'm sure you've all heard. It's attributed to a lot of different people. Who knows where it really came from? But the quote is, "When the student is ready, the teacher will appear." Now, that's not a parable. That's just a statement. But we're going to show, the difference in why that's not a parable and what a parable is. But this statement is true in a sense. It's true in the sense that if the student isn't ready to be taught, they can't be taught. So the student has to be ready in order for them to learn. Student is the one who apprehends the knowledge. A teacher is the one that imparts the knowledge. And if you're not a student or a teacher, then you're just a spectator. And what we have to decide in our spiritual life is, what are we? Are we a student? Are we a teacher? Or are we just a spectator when it comes to understanding not only the parables of Christ, but understanding what Christ said in a lot of other areas? So, first of all, Jesus used parables to teach the people. In Matthew 13:34, Jesus spoke all these things in parables to the crowds. He did not speak to them without a parable. This fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet: "I will open my mouth in parables. I will announce what has been hidden from the foundation of the world." In Psalm 78, 1 and 2, this is what was spoken of the prophet, the psalmist. "My people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth with a parable. I will utter hidden things from of old." So when Jesus spoke to the crowds, now in the crowds there were disciples, there were those who were following Jesus, there were those who were just following Jesus because he was a spectacle, he was a happening. They didn't necessarily believe in him. So when he spoke to these crowds of mixed people, he spoke to the crowds in parable. Now, Jesus didn't always speak in parables. Sometimes he debated with some people. He didn't speak all the time to his disciples in parables, but when he spoke to the crowds, he spoke to them in parables. And there's a reason for that, and we'll get into why he spoke to the mixed group of people in parables. The definition of a parable, the literal meaning of the Greek word parabole, it means to throw, bole, alongside. So to throw something alongside, which is a comparison. So a parable is a simple story. It's not complicated. It may seem complicated. It may seem like its meaning is complicated, but it's not a complicated story. It illustrates a moral or spiritual lesson. It's a comparison or an illustration of something else, compared one thing to something different. And it's a brief fictional narrative. Again, the emphasis on fictional. Parables were not true stories. They were stories made up to illustrate the point. And as a fictional narrative, one parable that everyone may be familiar with is the rich man and Lazarus. In that parable, there was a rich man who had everything in life, and there was Lazarus, who was a man who had leprosy that sat at the gates of the rich man, begging for the crumbs from the rich man. Both of them died. The rich man went to Hades, and Lazarus went to Abraham's bosom, which was the equivalent of heaven for Jews. And in Hades, Lazarus looked up, or the rich man looked up and saw Lazarus and asked Abraham if Lazarus could just dip his finger in some water and give him some water, because where he was tremendously hot. And he was told that can't be done. Lazarus now had nothing in life, but now in Abraham's bosom, he has everything. The rich man had everything in life, but now in death, the rich man has nothing. That's a parable. That didn't actually happen. You cannot base heaven and hell on what that parable says. There was another point for that parable, and it wasn't about telling people what heaven and hell was like. So that's just an illustration that parables are brief fictional narratives. The characteristic of parables, they are straightforward. They're as normal as they can possibly be. It has no complex parts or characters. This is not M. Night Shyamalan written or directed. There's no complication in the plot or the characters. Parables have a hook to draw listeners into the story, to engage them into the story. Parables have a specific point and sometimes utilize scripture in them. And there's always a twist at the end to get the listener's attention. A familiar parable that has a great twist at the end is the parable of the prodigal son. And the one son goes off to sow his wild oats, and the other son stays back. And in the end, it's the one who stayed back that really appeared to be the one who was on the outs. So, there's a little twist at the end. Now, understanding, many teachers used these parables to teach because of these characteristics, because it did engage the listeners. There wasn't complex. There were no complex characters or complex plots. There was a twist in it to keep the students, those who were listening, whether they're rabbis teaching, traveling prophets, whoever they were. Parables were a common way that was used to teach others and to speak to others for them to get the message. Misconceptions about parables, and there are many. One, it's not a riddle. A parable is not something that someone has said to you to, make your brain hurt. It's not a proverb. It's not a test. Jesus didn't say these parables to test the audience, to see, who could walk with him and who couldn't walk with him, who could understand him and who couldn't understand him. That's not a parable. It's not a problem that has an intellectual solution. They're not out there as a brain teaser for people to try to figure out mentally. It's it's a specific event. It's not a specific event. It's not actually something. It's something that could happen in everyday life, something that may have happened. A sower does go out and sow his seed in the field. A man does die, but a son does leave home and go off to, spend his inheritance, but it's not a specific story that is being related in the parable. And it's not a problem that has an intellectual solution. Oops, I already said that one. It's not applicable to everyone. It is applicable to everyone. There is something in every parable for everyone, though everyone doesn't get what's there for them. So there is an application. You can't read a parable and say, oh, that doesn't pertain to me. There is something in that parable that does pertain to you. So the important thing here in understanding these misconceptions is that you don't have to be Einstein to understand a parable. Now, when I first came to Christ and I started trying to read the Bible, it didn't make any sense to me. I, just thought I wasn't smart enough to understand it. I didn't know enough, like you got to go to school to be able to read the Bible. And I thought, it's so complicated. Jesus was so smart, he was way above everybody. And maybe if I studied philosophers and psychology and, just all kinds of, Aristotle and Plato, that when I come back and read the Bible, I would have enough knowledge to understand what was being said. I was completely wrong about that. The Bible has nothing to do with how much you know or how smart you are. Otherwise, where would we all be? God devised this so that it's not based on intellect. Everyone can understand the spirit and what God's lessons are. Now, there are levels of a parable. You may not have known this, but there are many levels in parables. And I'm comparing the levels of a parable like the levels of a hotel. Easiest way that I can try to explain it. There's a parking level. So here, the listeners, parking spots, you've been in a parking garage, you can kind of get lost. You don't know where the stairs are. It's dark. Where's the lobby? How do you get to the elevator? That's kind of the first level, right? You start hearing a parable, you get lost. You don't know what's being said. What did I miss? What did he say? That's the parking level. That's just, you arrive at the hotel, you park your car, you haven't been there before, you're a little bit lost. Then there's the lobby level. In the lobby level, there's a lot of new things going on, a lot of people checking in. You're seeing all kinds of hustle and bustle. There's elevators, there's the people in the getting coffee. It's just a lot of things going on. And at this level, you hear the story, you're engaged, you're in the lobby. Wow, this is great, it's brand new. You're excited. That's the lobby level of a parable. Then there's the mezzanine. The mezzanine is between floors. So you have a better view of what's going on in the lobby. You're not quite to the room floors yet. Maybe on the lobby level, or on the mezzanine level, there's a workout room, there's a spa. Uh, you're kind of settling in. You're getting the flow of things. You're out of the hustle and bustle. You're out of the parking level. You're kind of feeling a little comfortable. You're not in your room yet, but you're making your way there. Then there's the rooms level. So here in the rooms, there's many levels of rooms, though. There's first floor to however many floors are in the hotel. In this level, you start understanding things. It's a place where you can unpack, you can relax, you feel comfortable now. You don't feel like you're under stress. Things are beginning to make sense to you. So there's some things that you are understanding about it. And then within those room levels, within a parable, and I was just speaking about this earlier, but you may read a parable today and you may understand something from that parable, and then you go back 6 months from now and you read that parable again, and then there's another level of that same parable that now you're seeing something that you didn't see the first time, and you work your way up all the levels of the rooms as you read. You can never finish reading the Bible. You can never finish reading the parables. There's 41 parables that Jesus spoke. There's always something new. Every time you read, you'll find something new, because when you read it the first time, you weren't prepared to receive what was everything that was there. We're never ready for that. And then on the hotel, there's a roof. And we don't reach the roof. We reach the roof when we're in heaven with Christ, but that's the goal. The goal is for us to get to the roof and to be with Christ. And there with Christ, everything is crystal clear. So what I just told you here is a parable. The parable is the comparison between the levels in parables and a hotel. So I just showed you how a parable works. Now, what's the purpose of a parable? Why did Jesus use parables to teach and talk to the crowds? So in Matthew chapter 13, verses 10 through 17, we can read that the disciples came to him and asked, "Why do you speak to the people in parables?" He replied, "Because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they do have will be taken from them. This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they do not see, though hearing, they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will indeed be hearing and never understand. You will be ever seeing and never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn, and I will heal them." That's from Isaiah 6, 9 through 10. And then Jesus continues and says, "Blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see and did not see it, and hear what you hear and did not hear it." So Jesus explained to the disciples why he spoke to the crowds in parables. And he said that it was first to demonstrate that the one who has will be given more. So, as he said in that, to them it was given to be able to understand the parables. And he said, to those who have, they will be given more. And to those who have not, even what they think they have will be taken away. So, the one who has is the one who has faith in Jesus. So, in understanding this, and you'll see it more as we go through here, but those who have faith in Jesus can understand what Jesus is saying, and those who don't believe in Jesus don't understand what he's saying. They think they might understand what he's saying, but then they get lost, and even what they think they know, they end up losing. And this is plain in everything. If you're a teacher and there's students in the class who like you, who respect you, who believe in what you're teaching them, they are going to listen to you and they're going to learn from you. If there's students in the class who don't respect you, don't like you, don't believe in what you're teaching them, they're not going to listen. They're not going to hear you. They're not going to see what you're telling them. And they're just going to get lost and confused. And that's what Jesus is demonstrating, that those people who do believe in him, that they will be given more. And to the ones he was demonstrating who don't have, that they will lose even what they do have because they don't believe in him. They can't receive him. So it's to demonstrate to them, and it's to show that the ones who aren't listening to him, to make the deaf aware that they're deaf. If somebody's in the classroom And they're saying, I don't understand. I don't get algebra. I don't get trigonometry. I don't get calculus. It doesn't make sense to me. Well, isn't it better to know that it's not making sense to you than pretending that you do know what it's saying and then failing the class? So the fact that people ask the question, I don't understand what he's saying. Why is he telling this parable? What does that parable mean? Don't you hear? Are you deaf? Are you blind? Is your heart calloused? Is it thick? If it is, then if you want to be able to hear and to understand, then you need to change those things to be able to understand. It's kind of goes back to what Paul said about the law. Do you know why the law was given? I know many people believe the law was given to show us what we need to do to be perfect, to show us what we need to do not to sin. But that wasn't why Paul said the law was given. The law was given to show us how wrong we are. The law, Paul said, is a straight edge. And if we line up next to that straight edge, it shows us how crooked we are. Because if we didn't have a law, we wouldn't realize that we sinned. And if we didn't realize we sinned, we couldn't ask God to forgive us. And if we didn't ask God to forgive us, we couldn't be forgiven. We couldn't receive salvation. We couldn't believe in Jesus Christ. So it's the same situation here. Jesus spoke in these parables so those people who couldn't understand what he was saying would ask the question, why? Why can I hear? Why can I see? Why does my heart not understand what he's talking about? And it was to demonstrate that God has a time for everything. As he said, blessed are your eyes that they see, blessed are your ears that they hear, for truly many prophets, many righteous people longed to see this, but did not see it. They longed to hear it, and they did not hear it. God had a time. God had a time when Jesus Christ would be on the earth, and that's when he would bring out his spirit, and that's when people would be able to begin to understand those things that God had hidden from eons before. So parables speak to the heart of a person. If the heart is open to God, the parable can be received where the Spirit will work on the heart and reveal the meaning. But if the heart is callous or filled with worry or the riches of the world, the parable will go without meaning to those people. So that is the purpose of a parable, the same as the purpose of the law. Understanding parables. How do we understand a parable? Paul gives us in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 9 through 16, he says, but it is written, what no eye has seen and no ear has heard, nor the heart of man has imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him. These things God has revealed to us through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. For who knows a person's thoughts except the spirit of the person, which is in him? So also no one comprehends the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. Now, we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we might understand the things freely given to us by God. And we impart these in words, not taught by human wisdom, but taught by the Spirit, interpreting spiritual truths to those who are spiritual. The natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him, and he is not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned. The spiritual person judges all things, but he himself to be judged by no one. For who has understood the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? That's from Isaiah chapter 40, verse 13. But Paul continues, but we have the mind of Christ. So how do we understanding from the Spirit of God? So Paul is saying here that we understand what God says because we have the Spirit of God. God has given us his Spirit. What hasn't entered into the eyes, what hasn't entered into the ears, not even into the imaginations of our heart, what God has prepared for those who love him, but he has given us his Spirit because the Spirit of God searches all things that have to do with God, and in turn, give that information to us freely. God has prepared his Spirit to do that for those who believe in him. So, but a natural person cannot accept the things of God. In verse 14 of what we just read, the natural person does not accept these things because they're foolishness to him. I just talked about that in the use of parables. They don't understand it. They don't have faith in Christ. It doesn't make sense to them. It doesn't seem smart to them. It's not intellectual. They can't figure it out. It's foolishness to them. But a spiritual person can accept the things of God. As Paul said, the spiritual person judges, which doesn't mean actually to judge, but what it means is the spiritual person judges a situation, judges what's being said, meaning they comprehend all things, but in themselves, they're not comprehended by others. So, and you've probably found yourself in places like this where if you're speaking to someone who doesn't believe in Jesus Christ, they don't know what you're talking about. They don't understand. How can you have faith in that? How can you believe that? How can you believe that God created the world? How can you believe, how can you believe these miracles? They can't comprehend it. To them, it's foolishness, it's folly. But to us who believe, because we have the Spirit, we can comprehend it because the Spirit helps us to comprehend it. It's the same as those who didn't comprehend Christ or Peter or John or any of the disciples. So a spiritual person can accept the things of God because we can comprehend it, but a natural person cannot accept that. And believers have the mind of Christ. Paul said in this passage, verse 16, that we have the mind of Christ. We've been given the Spirit of Christ, we have the mind of Christ, and therefore in our hearts, we can see what God has freely given to those who believe in him. Now, I tried to put this whole passage together to maybe simplify it a little bit, and I created this little man here. So this is you or me, and just that passage from 1 Corinthians, we have the Spirit of God, verses 9 through 13, and we have the mind of Christ, so that we can comprehend all things from God. And in turn, we have a heart that is yielded or tender, as we read in what Jesus said about why he spoke to the crowd, because their hearts were callous, thick. But we have yielded hearts because we have faith in Christ. We have given our hearts freely to God. Our hearts are yielded to God. Now, that makes us, and this is kind of a compilation of that passage, believers are given the Spirit out of the things, believers are given the Spirit to search out the things of God and the mind of Christ to comprehend the things of God, which in turn inspires the heart, which is yielded by faith, to receive the things freely given to us by God. That's what Paul said in that passage. This is what he talked about. Now, what is a yielded heart? In Proverbs 23:26, the writer of Proverbs is writing to his son, and he says, "Give me your heart, my son, and let your eyes observe my ways." So, with a yielded heart, here the father is saying, yield your heart to me, my son, and you will see my ways. You will understand me. Now, how do we give our hearts? How do we yield our hearts to God? Will we yield our hearts to God the same way we do in any relationship? As a father is telling his son here, or a mother is telling her child, or a spouse is talking to their spouse, or a friend. How do we yield our hearts in those relationships? We open our heart. We have faith in them, right? We trust them. We hope in them. We love them. We talk with them. We listen to them. We don't run away from them. We don't hide from them. We accept their forgiveness. We accept their understanding. They accept ours. We accept theirs. That's what a yielded heart is. It's a relationship. It's having that relationship. And in turn, that gives us or makes us the spiritual person, which Paul talked about in verse 15. This is the process for us understanding the parables, that you have the Spirit, you have the mind of Christ, you have a yielded heart already because you have faith in Christ. And so now, by having a relationship, by having faith, trusting, hoping, loving, talking, listening, not hiding from God, accepting God's forgiveness, accepting God's understanding, we are yielded to God, and then we can let the Spirit search the Word, let the mind of Christ inspire our hearts, that we can receive the things that God is giving to us in the messages that are in the parables. Now, spiritual gold that we talked about in the beginning, what our takeaways are, the benefit of understanding the parables as we go through these is that it gives us confidence, it gives us strength, and it gives us joy. The key to understanding the parables of Jesus is a yielded heart. God is doing all the work. He's given us his Spirit. He's given us the mind of Christ. It's just up to us to yield our heart to him. The Spirit and the mind of Christ will take care of the rest in us. And as we talked about with different levels, we're not all at the same level in our lives. We all have different things going on in our lives. And so there's certain things that one person picks up and another person doesn't at this time in their life, and something else that they pick up later. It doesn't matter what what affects one person or what inspires one person and or another person. It's what's important to you. And the Spirit of God knows what you need now. And that's what will speak to you through the mind of Christ, through the Spirit of God. That will speak to your heart for what you need at that moment. And then how parables help us grow spiritually. The more we have, the more is revealed, block upon block. As we go through those parables, one block on top of another block. Each time we understand, each time we learn something, we learn more. We keep building upon those insights that we receive through the Spirit and through the mind of Christ and our yielded heart. So that is understanding the parables. And next week, my plan is to actually take a parable and go through it with you. I do have parables ready to do that, but I want to have you, as I said previously, there's 41 parables that Jesus spoke. Um, but in the comments section in YouTube or on Facebook, you pick a parable. Let me know what parable you would like for us to discuss and go through and understand. Um, you can comment, as I said, you can send me an email and just tell me, Jim, I'd like to, this parable that's really, I'd like to understand more about. Can we look at this parable? Or you could text me. It's my phone number. You just text me and tell me, what parable it is that you would like to discuss. And that is the parable that we will talk about in the next episode. So I hope this is really meaningful to you. I know all these notes will be in the notes in the YouTube. They'll also be on the website. So I post all of these videos on the website, and when you go to check out the video, the notes are all there. So all the passages, even my picture of the little spiritual man, will be in those notes. So I hope that, again, this was meaningful, and I hope that God uses this richly in your life and in your heart. So God bless, and thank you.